Hello, welcome back to MidEast In-Depth, part of Levant TV's press reviews. Akiva Eldar writes in Monitor to assess the recent statement of US Secretary of State John Kerry. Eldar says it's too bad that the Secretary of State used the explosive term apartheid to warn on the severe implications of burying the two-state solution. It is also too bad that professional Jewish politicos headed by the pro-Israel lobby American Israel Public Affairs Committee, the AIPAC, managed to turn the Israeli-Palestinian tragedy into a weapon in the struggle between the two rival parties in the United States. Eldar explains the term apartheid does no justice to pre-1967 Israel. Before the war, during which the West Bank, East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip areas were conquered, in those days Israel did not have racist laws that discriminated against people. Kerry didn't join the Israeli left, he simply repeated the same message that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivered 5 years ago. Netanyahu explained that the two-state solution was the only way to ensure that Israel preserves its Jewish character and democratic nature. Eldar says the Arab neighborhoods in East Jerusalem that were annexed to the State of Israel were disconnected from the municipal water supply, but funds were allocated for the construction of Jewish neighborhoods while the inhabitants of East Jerusalem have a difficult time obtaining building permits. Some 60 years after the establishment of the State of Israel, whose Declaration of Independence promises absolute equality of rights for all the country's citizens, there is a noticeable gap between Jews and Arabs. There is no need to exhaust oneself reading the abundant data about the increase in systematic discrimination against Israeli Arabs, as detailed on the website of the Association for Civil Rights in Israel. Eldar adds it is sufficient to hear the testimony of the leader of the Habayit HaYehudi Party, Minister of Economy and Trade Naftali Bennett. He complained that only 2% of Arabs who studied computer programming work for Jewish employers. It is simply bizarre, said Bennett at a conference organized by the authority to develop the Arab sector, admitting that there was deep-rooted discrimination against Israeli Arabs in the job market. And finally, Eldar concludes, presumably there is still more to come, another peace process, more settlements, more discrimination. The most important thing, though, is don't use the word apartheid. And staying in Israel, also on the story, Peter Bowman, The Guardian's correspondent in Jerusalem, writes a piece titled "Israel Risks Becoming Apartheid State If Peace Talks Fail." Bowman starts saying that US Secretary of State John Kerry has warned in a closed-door meeting in Washington that Israel risks becoming an apartheid state if US-sponsored efforts to reach an Israeli-Palestinian peace settlement fail. Afterwards, as a public storm grew around the remarks, Kerry issued a statement regretting the use of the word apartheid, saying it had opened him to partisan political attacks, and he said, "If I could rewind the tape, I would have chosen a different word." And Kerry reminds us that Israeli leaders had made similar points in the past, but apartheid, a word best left out of the debate here at home. Bowman says, regardless of the apology, Kerry's remarks represent a significant departure, as senior US officials historically have avoided the word apartheid relating to Israeli policies. It is believed to be the first time a US official of Kerry's standing has used the contentious term in the context of Israel, even if only as a warning for the future. And the Emergency Committee for Israel, whose chairman is the prominent neoconservative William Kristol, said even Barack Obama condemned the use of this term when running for president in 2008. It is no longer enough for the White House to clean up after the messes John Kerry has made. It is time for John Kerry to step down as Secretary of State or for President Obama to fire him. Although the danger of Israel of a failure to move towards a two-state solution has been framed by Israeli politicians in terms similar to those used by Kerry, US officials have long been wary of following suit. When the former President Jimmy Carter used it for the title of his 2006 book, Palestine, Peace or Apartheid, it caused controversy. Kerry's comments reflect similar recent warnings to Israel from Western diplomats that the collapse of the peace talks might lead to the country's increasing isolation. The Secretary of State said a two-state solution will be clearly underscored as the only real alternative because a unitary state winds up either being an apartheid state with second-class citizens or it ends up being a state that destroys the capacity of Israel to be a Jewish state. And we are joined today by London-based political commentator William Spring. Thank you very much for being on MidEast In-Depth, part of Levant TV's press reviews.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, thank you very much for joining us today. My question to you, Mr. Spring, is what do you think of US Secretary of State John Kerry's statement saying Israel risks becoming an apartheid state should peace talks fail? Do you agree with Mr. Kerry, and why?
Well, I don't agree with him because it seems to me that Israel is already an apartheid state and has been ever since it was created. I mean, it's about the only country in the world which is a combination of race and religion, because no one is quite sure what a Jew is, you see. Mm-hmm. When you say Jew, do you mean a man's religion, or do you mean his race? And of course, the majority of contemporary Israelis are not racially Jews anyway. Mm-hmm. They were Poles or whatever, wherever they came from, in Central Asia. And they converted to Judaism around about the 9th century, I believe. Mm-hmm. But racially, I think Yasser Arafat's got far more racial Jewishness in his chromosomes than the murderers of Yasser Arafat, the Zionist entity people. Mm-hmm. I think it's a complete nonsense that they should have a state built on such ambiguous foundation as the current Jewish state. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Many Jews were misled by the early Zionists, to support the Zionist project. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of propaganda that this was about a state, a people without a state for a land without a people. But there were plenty of people living in Palestine at the time of the Zionist project got going, which of course the British government didn't admit this. Mm-hmm. And these guys were called Arabs, and the British government just gave out the impression, it's a complete wasteland, nobody living there, and let the Jews go and live there. Well, that's fair enough in one sense, if that was the case, but it isn't. Mm-hmm. Never was. Mm-hmm. So I think the apartheid state it's always been there since Israel was invented, and one has to decide: is one in favour of an apartheid state? Of course, I personally think that whatever replaces Israel, because we're now talking about post-Israel. Mm-hmm. Israel cannot continue to survive in this bizarre, contorted form for very long.
What's in a post-Israel? Yes? What would happen in a post-Israel, Mr. Spring? Do you think it will be a two-state or?
Oh no, I don't think the two-state solution is at all feasible or viable. This reminds me of the South African experiment with Bantustan. Mm-hmm. The white South Africans, they thought, we'll have a two-state solution and we'll put the blacks in places like Transkei. But these places were no good as, actually to create a state in. And the state mm-hmm. had its complete policy controlled by South Africa. Mm-hmm. So the only way forward was, in fact, the abolition of apartheid and the creation of majority rule. Mm-hmm. And the fact it hasn't worked out very well in some respects isn't the point. The point is you couldn't run South Africa in the way it was being run before.
Yes.
And equally, the Israelis are going to find out mm-hmm. that the rest of the world is not going to stand by and wait for nuclear blackmail yes. by the Israelis. Mm-hmm. And the Israelis say, look, if you don't support us, we'll drop a nuclear bomb on the Arabs. Mm-hmm. That's mm-hmm. not going to happen. Yes. The Americans or somebody is going to lose patience with the Israeli state and pull the plug economically on them.
Yes.
And once the American money stops flowing to Israel, then Israel's finished anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, compared to his president, President Obama, who refrained from using the term apartheid since 2008 when he was running for president, why do you think at this period in time Mr. Kerry decided to use this term?
Well, Kerry has to give some impression that he's like progressive. The fact is, nobody in the American administration is remotely liberal at all or progressive. I mean, but Obama, remember, came in as a lefty.
Yes.
He came in as a left-winger. But it's been a bit of a great disappointment, hasn't he?
Yes.
I mean, he's not really much of a left-winger when he runs his own concentration camp in Guantanamo Bay, and he's been unable to close it, breaks all his promises to his supporters. And I think Kerry, we had great hopes of Kerry. I mean, he was of my generation. He was a sort of 60s, he was a 60s beatnik.
Yes.
And, you know, he withdrew his support for the Vietnam War. And, you know, we thought he was going to be fairly progressive. But the problem is, there are no progressives in the American administration. They're all different shades of fascism, really. You may say, well, this guy's more agreeable, Hermann Goering, you know, than Adolf Hitler. Sorry, there's all the noise here. I'm by the Inter Court.
Yes.
But you may get certain fascists who are more fascist than others. But that's not really a proper description of progressive politics.
No.
Kerry is no longer a progressive politician, but at the same time he likes to keep his contacts with the progressives, so he uses these terms to show he's actually quite enlightened.
William Spring, political commentator based in London, thank you very much for your remarkable views, which we do respect. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, then.
And for more updates, please visit levant.tv. Thanks for watching and bye for now.